I had caffeine. I should manage to stay awake.
Caffeine is a way to it's a way to obviously solve all these physiological problems. So we'll talk about it during the call. So thanks to everyone for jumping on. We're going to broadcast this live as well and record it and YouTube it and all the other jazz that you can do. So today we're going to be talking about understanding physiological mechanisms, why understanding them is important, how your interventions that you give to your clients affect the body, and then how we can optimize training, recovery, and adaptation. Because realistically, that's what we're here for. If we don't have a purpose to optimizing, to understanding these things, then we kind of miss out on the bigger picture and we don't get the results that we want for our clients. So that is super important to get behind. So what first thing we need to do is define all the systems that we need to understand. Okay, and if we can do that, then we can start to break down and understand how each of the systems affects the different problems that our clients are having. So the 6 systems that we're going to we need to understand, and we're not going to do all of them today because that would just be impossible to cover in an hour and you wouldn't have a complete understanding of pretty much anything at that point. So this is very much like the thought processes behind everything. So with the first one, the nervous system, need to understand the control of the CNS and also the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, role in movement, and also adaptation. So we need to really understand how the nervous system works, and then also how it interacts with the system below it, which is the musculoskeletal system. So a muscle contraction, looking at hypertrophy, how that affects bone density, all these things kind of have a really important place. From there, we've got a cardiovascular system, heart rate, blood flow, oxygen delivery. We need to understand how we can actually affect that. This is one I'm particularly I'd say a little bit more violent about and how I feel about it, because everyone pretends that I have an understanding. Well, first of all, they don't have an understanding. You can tell very quickly when someone does or doesn't. Someone pretends to have an understanding of the musculoskeletal system and what adaptations they can get from weight training. And with weight training, we're very precise. We use our reps of 1 to 3. We use our overcoming isometrics. We use our yielding stuff. We use rate of force development type exercises, and all these different concepts to try and get across different physiological adaptations of the muscular system. Yet I would argue, and I would be right in saying the heart is probably more important, because if the heart, doesn't work, we kind of die really quickly. So with the cardiovascular system, as a coach, when we're working with clients, we should be able to understand exactly what type of effect is happening with the heart when someone is doing exercise, and then looking at the cardiovascular system, what type of response do we want to create from our exercise program? Low battery on my headphones, that's fine. From our cardiovascular system in our training. So for example, you should know the type of training to optimize stroke volume. You should know the type of training to optimize VO2 max. And you should know how optimizing each of those systems will give your clients the results they want. From there, the endocrine system, hormonal responses and stress adaptation. And this goes a lot deeper. For example, I've seen a lot of coaches recently, and this annoys the shit out of me. So it really frustrates me, where they start talking about hormonal responses to exercise as an acute variable versus a chronic variable. And this just really, for me, indicates that they have no goddamn idea on how physiology works. So for an example, if you do weight training, you secrete cortisol. If you do weight training and you do heavy compound lifts, you increase testosterone for a brief period of time. That brief spike in testosterone has no more of a collective anabolic effect than just doing a bicep curl exercise. Like, what people are conflating is the fact that testosterone being elevated as an acute response to a stressor of training is the same as injecting exogenous testosterone, and it's absolutely not. The jump and spike in testosterone has literally zero impact on someone's ability to build muscle and burn tissue. And it's misunderstanding the fact that it's overall mechanical tension that's causing hypertrophy for the musculoskeletal system, and they're conflating it with the endocrine adaptation. The endocrine adaptation that it boosts testosterone isn't really useful for most people as an acute variable. Okay. And there's a lot of coaches who talk about it, that you should make your leg training, primarily squats and deadlifts, because you get more testosterone out of it. It just really indicates a really short-sighted view of physiology. So don't do that. Always look at the difference between acute and systemic responses when you're looking at anything, because then you can understand how something really works. Because realistically, like doing aerobic system exercise, that is an acute cortisol response. But is that cortisol response going to be problematic? Charles Poliquin, one of the great coaches, he used to say, and same with the Paul Chek people, and actually a ton of people in the 90s, would say that, doing some form of cardio would increase cortisol too much to cause problems because cardio spikes cortisol. That was basically a total misrepresentation of the data and what people are doing. So that short-term spike in cortisol doesn't make a difference at all to people. But we'll go into that a little bit later. Now, we also need to understand our metabolic system, so the energy pathways, how we produce ATP, and also the difference between carb and fat oxidation. I nearly called them cat and fart oxidation, which would be a really good tongue twister there, and how that actually impacts our clients at certain times, and then the impact of the immune system and its impacts around inflammation and recovery. If we can understand all 6 of those physiological systems at a pretty deep level, and we're not going to cover them all today because as I said, it's pretty much impossible to do that. We can really start to get an understanding of what's going on with our clients, and we can start looking at different conditions they may be experiencing, and then how we can actually tailor our program to work around any of those type of responses. So there's a lot of coaches now talking shit about coaches who say they specialize in PCOS and endocrine disorders, female endocrine disorders. Just because someone doesn't have an endocrinology degree, so not an endocrinologist, doesn't mean that they can't create a positive adaptation in someone's endocrine system. In fact, it's fucking stupid. It's such a short-minded view of looking at the things, because in that case, why are you trying to give them cardio to improve their cardiovascular system? It's the same type of logic that they're going for there. And with the endocrine system for a female, for example, with PCOS, there's a ton of training adaptations, there's a ton of cardiovascular adaptations and metabolic adaptations, and I would argue immune system and inflammation adaptations that we can positively influence that will improve that client's ability to sustain a high quality life. And if you can do that, then you're in a pretty good space because you get really good results. Clients talk about you, you get testimonials, win-win. So a lot there, and I'm going to keep, because these seminars are going to be a thing that I don't stop doing. We're going to dive deep into all of these over time, not today. So what we're going to talk about first is we're going to go into the world we all understand really well, which is exercise intervention, because the people on this call and the people who have signed up for this course and will watch it in replay kind of know that they're personal trainers first and foremost, so they understand the exercise interventions more so than anything else. What we need to also understand is where can we use these interventions with our clients in the term of a periodized program. And there's a ton of coaches out there. I'll call them out. I don't care. Angus Bradley, he's one of them. He's built up quite an Instagram following. I think being addicted to cocaine is really good for building a following. And he says periodization doesn't matter. Periodization does matter because if you apply the wrong things at the wrong time for a client, which would involve planning and periodization, you're doing shit wrong and you're going to actually set your clients back. So understanding the intervention that you're doing and then how it works, it allows you to give a better result to your client, give them something that's not going to hurt them and fuck them up, and then also actually start to understand the physiology behind everything and get a better outcome. So let's go over some of the forms of training that we can use in their mechanisms. Let's go for plyometrics first. They improve tendon stiffness and enhance neuromuscular efficiency. So plyometrics are not just a box jump. That's a very low level plyometric as according to the picture that we have there, but that rhythmic, really snappy, jump and change the direction that you do in plyometric training can be really good for tendon stiffness. Now, with that being said, just because it's good for a tendon doesn't mean it's good for a tendon all the time. And the absolute answer there is no. And for example, another thing that's really good for tendon health is a isometric. Maximum or even like supramaximal isometrics are really good for tendon health, but just really good for tendon health at different times. So what a lot of people will do is they'll read this or read something like this and they go, all right, cool. Tendon health's really fantastic. We'll quickly make sure I haven't got that there. Yeah, cool. I'll start doing some plyometrics. But if a client's in the wrong space and they haven't really built that up, and they start going to more advanced stuff really quickly, they increase their risk of injury because you also violate the rule of progressive overload and load management. So this stuff does need to be periodized and it does need to be planned. And discounting the word periodization just because you don't like it and you like doing different shit every day is not doing a good job. Now, hypertrophy training, this is where a lot of people have no idea on what stimulates mechanical tension or what does muscle fiber growth. And we need to actually start understanding how the CNS works to actually understand that. So I'm not going to pick on you guys because we've only got two on the call at the moment, Mark and Angus, but who here has heard of the size principle? Just give me a quick hands up if you have heard the Heinemann size principle. Cool. Basically, it means that with a higher level of amplitude or velocity and a higher level of load, you recruit more fast twitch muscle fibers. Cool. So heavy and fast basically recruits everything. Out of the fibers that are best most likely to grow, are they type 1 or type 2? Answer is type 2. Fast twitch fibers have the highest rate of growth potential and also ability to get jacked. Do muscle fibers also fire on what's called the all or nothing continuum? They're either on or they're off. Okay, so there's no gradual thing there. They're on or they're off based on the load and the velocity that you're using. So for hypertrophy training, what we generally see a lot of the time, and I see a lot of influencer coaches do this, and God, it drives me insane. They actually do their training in a way that doesn't actually maximize mechanical tension. They try and do a slow concentric phase and really elongated eccentric phases to maximize mechanical tension. In reality, they're just trying to look good for Instagram. They don't understand what they're doing in the training world. They're genetically blessed anyway. And what's happening there is there's confusing sensation with tension. And it's a very common mistake. So the chasing a sensation as a proxy for hypertrophy is not really effective. Same with the chasing of muscle damage and the pump, not really effective. With hypertrophy training, we know that lifting a pretty heavy weight pretty quick maximizes mechanical tension because it's that velocity times load, which will maximize that tension. And even with the eccentric, when we see eccentric training done and overly done, people still don't understand how eccentric training works. So they think like doing a 3 to 4 second or really long eccentric is going to cause more hypertrophy. It's not actually the case. What happens is it actually limits the ability of you to do more concentric based training, which is where the most hypertrophy actually comes from. And a lot of people don't get that. The thing with the eccentric phase is it is useful for other parts of the training intervention that we're looking to achieve. So first one that we're going to say will be safety. Like who really wants to do, rock bottom squats where you just drop as fast as you can with 200 kilos on your back? Like no one really wants to do that because the load on tendons is really high. You're turning a weight training exercise into a plyometric exercise, and the tendon's not really going to love that. Okay. The next thing that you see with eccentrics is it can help with the quality of load and execution when you're looking at powerlifting and stuff like that, which is cool. It can also be used to overcome strength plateaus due to the principle of specificity of a range of motion in a particular lift. So all these things actually matter, but when you see people promoting it for hypertrophy, particularly a slow concentric phase, it actually demonstrates that they don't know what they're doing, which, cool. And as you go through Instagram after this call, you look and you'll see a whole lot of influencers are doing their Romanian deadlift super slow, trying to squeeze everything, and their rear delt flies like this, as if they're going to get more load, and it's just not really it. So when you start to understand how hypertrophy training really works, you can actually modulate it in a number of ways to achieve a ton of different goals. Now, max strength training enhances CNS activation, increases motor unit recruitment. Cool. This actually shows that max strength training has a ability to help in hypertrophy training. So periodic phases of max strength emphasis in your training can be very, very useful. Power training increases fast twitch fiber activation and rate of force development. So again, let's break this down and how this shit is actually useful for the people we see in the gym. Let's just say you have a client who's a hard gainer. They struggle to gain muscle. They've never really trained. They suck basically at this weight training game, which it does happen. They've never played sport. They've never actually built up and trained these qualities here, these first four. So by giving them some power training and actually teaching them to be a little bit more explosive, you teach that client to recruit more fast twitch muscle fibers. If you teach someone to recruit more fibers, will they get better or worse results from training? They'll always get better. So it's not that power training it's not necessarily the fastest way to get hypertrophy. Like you certainly can. Olympic weightlifters, we can all argue that Olympic weightlifters are pretty jacked, but they're not as jacked as bodybuilders, which is fine. It's a different outcome. But it's like looking at these things and go, which one of these can actually help my client as part of their program? And then how do I put it into their program in a structured way? And for a lot of people, like you'll always find this, and I see this all the time with different coaches. The coaches who generally go to look at very varied ways of training and like chucking in bands and weight releases and all kinds of fancy shit into their training generally aren't gifted for hypertrophy training. This is just a personal observation and personality wise. They're not gifted for hypertrophy training, so they don't get that much out of it. So they kind of stop doing it. And if someone's gifted for hypertrophy training, they're generally gifted for most types of training. Chris Bumstead is a great example of that. The guy's got an awesome vertical for someone who's trained like super slow for years with bodybuilding type training. He's still incredibly athletic relatively, despite training like a bodybuilder. So if you're gifted for bodybuilding training, you can generally do most types of training. Phil Heath, I think it was Phil Heath. He won the Olympia X number of times. He was a high-level basketball player, like super explosive. He just gave up in basketball because he was 5'7", which kind of makes sense, right? And when he went to bodybuilding, he got jacked as hell because high degree of intent, high recruitment of muscle fibers, high recruitment of fast twitch 2 muscle fibers. They're the ones that are most gifted for hypertrophy. And guess what? He got jacked as hell. So kind of makes sense. So you have a client who's like a hard gainer, actually giving them some max strength and power training can be a really good way to actually help them get better and actually help them get the hypertrophy goals that they're eventually after. They may not want them today, but generally most people want to change their body composition. Now with steady state cardio, this is where I start to get really annoyed. I'm so sick and tired of coaches going, I don't give cardio to my clients. Like, fuck my life. I don't give cardio, it doesn't work. I don't count calories, it doesn't work. But I give my client 15 to 20,000 steps a day. That's structured cardio. Like, there's not one person who does, besides people in trades, who will do 15, 20,000 steps a day without actually having to be a very specific effort that they want to achieve. Okay? It has to be a very specific choice that someone does. Now, with these people who also say we don't do calorie counting, they give their clients like, you're allowed to eat this much meat with dinner and this many veggies and this many carbs, but I don't want you to count it. You can only eat this much. It's still counting. It's just without writing it down. So these coaches say steady state cardio doesn't work for fat loss. Well, if you're on a calorie deficit, absolutely. But the actual mitochondrial efficiency and the increase in fat oxidation are really useful tools for clients. So for example, if someone has fatigue or someone has low energy, giving them steady state cardio is a great training tool because it increases their mitochondrial efficiency. Mitochondria are the energy house of the cell. So that in theory, the more efficient your mitochondria are, the more mitochondria you have, the better your energy levels on a day-to-day basis are going to be. And if we have a look at the vast majority of executives and C-level people in jobs, the vast majority, not the vast majority, a whole bunch of them do a whole bunch of aerobic exercise. There seems to be an overabundance of triathletes and endurance runners or cyclists in high-powered corporate jobs. And they never seem to get tired. It's because they do this high level of aerobic work the whole time. It also makes it better for them making decisions because they're better with the way they manage their energy. It also enhances fat oxidation. And a lot of people struggle to oxidize fat as a fuel. So if you have a client who's diabetic, or type 2 diabetic, they do struggle to use fat as a fuel. They're going to need carbohydrates the whole time. And some clients, easiest way to tell, get the client to go without carbs for a little bit and they'll be absolutely struggling. Or get them to have a longer break between meals. If they have a longer break between meals and they really start to go flat, they struggle with fat oxidation because we all have enough body fat to power us for a couple of weeks actually, except for really lean bodybuilders. So if someone really struggles with gaps between meals and they need to constantly be snacking to feel good, giving them some steady state cardio can actually make adherence to a diet better because they're better at oxidizing fat. They're better at maintaining their own level of energy. So again, it's a really good tool. High intensity interval training. Cool. So this one boosts glycolytic adaptation and lactate threshold improvement. So if someone obviously has to do a sport or an activity with a low lactate, that's absolutely fine. Now, glycolytic adaptation, if someone struggles to actually get a pump in training and upregulate their carbohydrate storage and say they feel like they get fat when they have carbs, they attract a lot of water, giving them high intensity interval training can improve that glycolytic upregulation that they have. And then later on, they get better pumps in training, they get better nutrient partitioning. So basically, nutrient partitioning is how much you store in a muscle, how much gets stored as fat. That's basically a good way to look at it. So if you improve nutrient partitioning, you put more stuff into the muscles, less stuff into the body fat. For me, that sounds like a good option. So a lot of people, could really benefit from high intensity interval training. The thing is, you need to understand where their cardiovascular system is from when you give it. So what I mean by that is high intensity interval training is really fucking hard if you do it properly. Mark, you've done a session with me. It wasn't fun, was it? You still look like you're a bit green from thinking about it. Like, it was a very hard session. It was rough. It was not pleasant at all, was it? If someone has blood pressure of 140/90, or they have, really low VO2 max, or, they got a really high resting heart rate, that is going to be a really tough session for them. And it can actually be more detrimental. They might not be ready for actually doing high intensity interval training. So by understanding how to assess the aerobic system and then giving the appropriate amount of steady state cardio to get the adaptations you want, then they'll benefit from high intensity interval training. We see this all the time with people going to F45 classes and shit like that after not training for a while, where they get injured, they really struggle, they get really hungry, and it's because they don't have these adaptations in place. So you need to do that. Now, the next one, mobility training, increases neuromuscular relaxation, tendon elasticity. Got a ton of people saying we don't need to train mobility. Okay, we got a ton of people who say you don't need to train mobility. That's a load of crap. For a lot of people, mobility training can be very, very useful for neuromuscular relaxation. So stretching, for example, tendon elasticity, it does have its place. So again, does your client need it? And a lot of people will say you can just do strength training is enough to maintain mobility. Yes, but it's not enough to improve mobility. Yes, it will, but is it the most efficient way of doing it? And I would argue it absolutely isn't. And you see a ton of coaches who will say, oh, look, I can still, get close to the splits without doing any mobility training. They've just been training in that range and they've maintained it. They haven't improved it. So if you do want to improve mobility, you have to do the thing. And a lot of coaches don't understand that. I know it sounds really like a little bit blah, but it's amazing how many people say, oh, just do weight training, you'll be fine. No, it's not going to work. So if I understand how these work from a physiological point of view and also from a structural biomechanical point of view, you can do some really cool shit with your clients. We're not going to get through this. Yeah, we will. We'll be fine. Now, with our systemic changes and different interventions, okay, this is where we need to start looking at. It's not the acute response to testosterone, of testosterone to a weight training session that is going to do anything for anyone, okay? Now, it's systemic changes are always the most important. So we have a look at this. Strength training adaptations. Obviously, we get muscle fiber adaptation, okay? Pretty easy. Muscle fiber hypertrophy, type 2 growth. We get increased ATP PCR, so adenosine triphosphate, phosphocreatine efficiency, and greater motor unit recruitment and neural drive. So we basically become a better athlete from that. That's what you're looking at with strength training adaptations. You are not getting a high level systemic testosterone from that or a high level systemic cortisol. People have got to get their ideas of acute responses actually being relevant for like 9 times out of 10. Okay. If that was the case, and this is where my argument has to go, if weight training increased your testosterone and actually made a measurable difference, why wouldn't you just do it more and more often to boost your testosterone? What happens when you do weight training too much to your testosterone? You overtrain and you tank. And your testosterone goes down. One of the biggest markers for overtraining is decreased blood testosterone and increased blood cortisol from being in a stressful situation. So to a point, like, they say up to 3 to 4 times a week increases your testosterone. It doesn't do it systemically. It just does it acutely. But if you train like 12 times a week, what happens is it causes a long-term depression. So you can't have it both ways, in my opinion. Now, with your endurance training adaptations, you got your VO2 max, your mitochondrial density, blah, blah, blah. All these things here, different forms of training will target these to an extent and make it better. Okay. How good's coffee, Angus? So, for example, increased stroke volume, your cardiac output work. So your long steady state at between 120 to 140 BPM is going to be the most efficient way to do that. your high intensity interval training is not going to increase your stroke volume, for example. So if you want to train a cyclist for a long-term thing, giving them the high intensity interval training a lot of the time may not be the best strategy for the client. Will it improve their VO2 max? Yes, it's probably the fastest way to improve their VO2 max. For your older population, can you improve their VO2 max by using high intensity interval training? Yes, but only if they've got the underlying physical capacity to do it. Okay, because there is a risk to reward thing that you need, ratio that you need to look at with your clients. So we can see here that with different things here, okay, high intensity interval training, rapid VO2 max improvement, higher EPOC. So EPOC is post-exercise oxygen consumption, not as relevant as what a lot of people would think it is, okay? But it's quite good for nutrient uptake and partitioning. Rapid VO2 max improvement, really useful for some things. Steady state, increased mitochondrial density and lower cortisol response. For all the people who go to F45 classes and body fits and all these high intensity interval training classes, the majority of them are probably pretty stressed out and overworked and under recovered. I'm sure at least 2 people on the call would agree, right? For the live and replay, I can't actually talk to you, so too bad. If they're going to do these interval training classes like 5 days a week, sure, they may improve their VO2 max, but are they actually changing the actual systems that they want to change to make themselves feel better, i.e. increased mitochondrial density and lowered cortisol response? I would argue for most people, increasing those 2 factors will lead to a bigger quality of life improvement than most other things. Okay? If you have more energy to deal with your day-to-day and more energy to deal with the stresses of life, and you have a lower response to stress, you will generally be happier and healthier. If you have a high VO2 max, for example, that's great for activities that require it, but it doesn't actually mean that you've got more mitochondria or a lower cortisol response. It simply doesn't, which, cool, that's fine. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's like, what's the right application for my client? And I found, and this is I've been thinking for a long time of why the fuck is running so popular now? Like, why people decide to get into running? And everyone's now a runner. And I think it's this lowered cortisol response. It's not just a running high. It's the fact that people are finally now starting to train in the steady state cardiovascular system and do that type of training, and they all feel better for it. And it's a feel better that you feel better every single day. The vast majority of powerlifters I've dealt with who do zero cardiovascular training, they generally find everything pretty hard to do because they don't produce much energy, they walk slow, etc. The people who do a bunch of this, they generally feel better and more alive. So for a lot of clients, this steady state is just such a low barrier to entry form of exercise that they can win from significantly well. And you can understand when to apply it at the right time. You're going to do so much better with your clients. Now, with how supplements work differently for outcomes. So this is where we're going to start diving into the fact that different conditions or the same outcome can come from different conditions. Okay. So this is where understanding each of the system, which one of these systems is influencing what's going on, and then the mechanism of how it works will change your recommendation for the client. So the first one is, let's go through sleep. There's a number of different reasons why people may not sleep or may have struggles with their sleep. So we can go all the way to environmental factors for sleep, like they sleep in a room with a TV on, for example. That could be a pretty negative one. But for some people, if they train at night, they might just have too much sympathetic tone because they've done a heavy weight training or high intensity interval training session at night. They may find it hard to get to sleep. Cool. So magnesium glycinate in particular will actually enhance that parasympathetic activity to improve that person's sleep. So if someone's training at night and they find it starts to affect their sleep, it's highly possible it's an increase in sympathetic activity, which is changing some things. Okay. Now, what we need to do is we need to figure out what's the most effective way to do that, to fix that without causing problems to that person. So if someone is exercising at night and that's the time they can exercise, we're not going to say, no, get up in the morning, stare directly at the sun and get your circadian clock kicked into place so you get tired at night. That's not really going to work because their actual choice of exercising at night, which is absolutely fine, is going to influence their ability to go parasympathetic and go to sleep. It's going to take longer. That's totally fine. Now, they don't need to increase their gamma aminobutyric acid activity or reduce anxiety to improve sleep. That's not really going to make a difference for them. They need to get something that gets them parasympathetic fast, okay? So by understanding the physiology behind it, it will be very, very different, okay? So if someone struggles with waking up in the morning, we can look at a number of different variables that they've got going on to figure out what could possibly be the best thing for that person. So if someone struggles to wake up in the morning, it could be the fact that they don't get enough deep REM sleep. They don't get enough deep minutes of sleep, because you need about anywhere between 45 to 90 minutes of deep sleep per night to wake up feeling recovered. Cool. A supplement like glycine could be very useful because it decreases the amount of time it takes for someone to get into deep sleep. Okay. Taking a melatonin supplement will increase levels of melatonin, but it won't necessarily increase the time someone spends in deep sleep. So what it does is, by understanding the problem, understanding the physiology behind it, and then looking at all the different solutions, and then not just magnesium helps sleep because it's magnesium, but understanding the mechanism by which it works. If you understand the mechanism by which it works, you can then make a very educated choice for your client with a high degree of confidence that'll work. And if you're making a choice with a high degree of confidence that'll work, then it's highly likely it's going to work, which is a win. So, for example, this is another one we see a lot of time in the training world. Okay, people will take a whole bunch of pre-workout supplements or workout supplements in general. So creatine, beta-alanine, nitrates, and caffeine are all very common supplements that people use. Now, they all affect different systems. So creatine increases phosphocreatine storage and ATP regeneration, so it's good for lifting heavy shit. It will be good for improving your ability to lift heavy shit and hypertrophy, because you will have more fuel to contract more of your fast 2 fibers. When you contract more of your fast twitch fibers, you can basically create a stronger contraction, a stronger maximal voluntary contraction, and create more mechanical tension, which leads to more hypertrophy over time. Great. Beta-alanine buffers acidity, reduces muscle fatigue. Not really useful for hypertrophy, because when you get to those high rep ranges, it's not really mechanical tension that you're working on. It's overall fatigue that's happening for a lot of clients. So beta-alanine, useful for someone who actually has to go through like a sport that's highly glycolytic, where they get a lot of burning sensation. That can really help with that. Now, the nitrates, increase nitric oxide, increase blood flow endurance. Cool. If you have an endurance athlete, they're really good. Bodybuilders like it because it increases the pump via vasodilation. The pump and vasodilation doesn't really influence our ability to enhance mechanical tension by any stretch. And in fact, not chemically, that's not the word I'm looking for. From a volume perspective, like actual volume of fluid in the cell, having a good pump, like a really good pump, can actually make it harder to get maximal levels of mechanical tension in training. So we definitely don't want to avoid it. I would recommend that people try it out, but it's certainly not a necessary one to have. Now, the last one is caffeine. It blocks adenosine receptors, increases alertness, and reduces fatigue. Cool. So caffeine will do a different thing as well. So each of these supplements will be useful in different situations. Now, it would be impossible for me to go over every single physiological system and then figure out what's actually going on with it. But you can really start to get an understanding of going, well, what's the problem that's wrong? All right, cool. What's a way that we can fix this, or what's a supplement or a food or an exercise strategy that fixes it? And then go, is this the actual mechanism that we need to affect? And we can see this all the way from things like the immune system. So, for example, you could have lowered levels of neutrophils on someone's blood work. Okay, so someone has systemically low level of neutrophils. Let's rule out that something bad's happened, or they're dealing with a chronic level infection, which would lower neutrophils. Okay, if someone has lower levels of a compound in your body that's meant to fight off a virus to stop you from getting sick, it is theoretically possible, in fact, very likely and probable, that they will get sick more often than the average person. Okay, if you don't have enough shit to fight off the bacteria and fight off viruses and all that type of stuff, highly likely you'll get more sick. I think that's a hard shift to take. Now, there are certain foods and supplements and all types of things that will improve your immune system. Okay, It just depends on how the immune system is being broken down and how it's been damaged. Is it an IgA response, which is in the mouth? Is it an IgE response, an IgG? There's all these different immunoglobulins in different parts of your immune system to understand. As soon as you can understand those parts of the immune system, you can actually go, all right, cool, this thing actually helps improve that part of the immune system and give your client a proper result. So one strategy that I've used in the past very successfully, and it sounds kind of gross, is when someone's training really freaking hard and they're doing a ton of work and a ton of volume, and it's normally a sporting environment, much more so than a bodybuilding physique thing. They'll be eating a ton of carbs, ton of high sugar, high glycemic index carbs, which are totally fine for this purpose. In fact, they're ideal for this purpose because they'll replenish muscle glycogen faster. What they'll have, though, because of the amount of volume of training that they have, is they'll actually have a lowered immune response. And the volume of carbohydrates they have, particularly sugary ones, will decrease their immune system for a solid period of time. Anywhere from like 4 to 8 hours after ingestion of that volume of sugary carbohydrates, you will have a depressed immune system. And particularly if they're training like 3 hours a day, it's a problem. Now, to mitigate that, what you can find out is you can find out what part of the immune system is suppressed. Now, off the top of my head, I can't remember. I think it's immunoglobulin E. I can't remember, but forgive me. Grapeseed oil has compounds in it to actually increase levels of immunoglobulin E and modulate that system. So having 5 grams of grapeseed oil post-training actually helps an athlete who's in that environment not get sick as much. Now, if you've got an athlete that's consistently sick and they have that particular response, if you give that to them, that creates a compounding effect of how valuable that strategy is. Because what happens is they can train more because they don't get sick. And that's worth a lot of money to teams. And it's also worth a lot of money to athletes because every workout that they do actually helps them get closer to their overall goal. So you can start really breaking these problems down and actually doing a little bit of, I guess, practice and figuring out what's going on and a ton of research for yourself, and you get awesome results for clients. So here's another way to look at it as well that a lot of people don't get. The point of today is really expose us all to how much shit we can actually know and how cool the effects that we can possibly influence our clients are. The way that we take our supplements target different tissues, okay? And so our method of ingestion and then also the form the supplement is in will affect what it does. So for example, if we look here at magnesium, if you look at your magnesium labels on your supplements that you buy from the store, generally they'll come as one or they'll come as a chelate. Chelate means there's multiple different compounds attached to it. So magnesium glycinate is magnesium oxide attached to a glycine molecule. Okay, so an amino acid. It's a nervous system relaxation, best for stress and sleep because glycine, magnesium is a parasympathetic toner. Glycine helps get you into deep sleep faster. Cool. Makes sense. Magnesium orotate actually helps magnesium get into the cell faster for cellular metabolism and cardiovascular benefits. So different magnesiums for different problems. So if I had someone who had really struggled with sleep, I would go magnesium glycinate versus someone with cardiovascular health issues who had no problems with sleep. I'd recommend magnesium orotate. So you can be very, very specific in the type of supplementation that you actually want to recommend to someone, which is really, really cool when you really want to get the best results for people. Now, other one is looking at the actual, uptake of supplements. So for example, carnitine, L-carnitine, for example, is something that you can take orally or something that you can inject either subcutaneously or intramuscularly. Okay. And it has different effects. So a lot of people will say when, you take carnitine, it doesn't really work as a fat burner. And you know what? If you take it orally, that's absolutely true. It doesn't help you burn fat at all. But if we inject it, it actually increases fat oxidation to a pretty decent amount. And a lot of people say it's not really statistically significant. Well, why the hell do they give it to racehorses who are worth more money than humans most of the time to get better performance out of racehorses and greyhounds? Because you want to increase their fat oxidation so they don't get fatigued as fast so they can recycle ATP faster. You'll see a lot of this stuff in racing as something that's really quite useful. And even the Olympics now have allowed injectable carnitine up to a point. I can't remember what that point is, but they also have like levels of caffeine that you can take, because once caffeine gets to a point, it becomes a performance enhancing drug, which is kind of wild, but no one ever considers that. Caffeine's like a drug, and yes, it absolutely is. Other ones, different types of B12, for example. You have cyanocobalamin. I can't even pronounce those words. Some people who have a faulty or a different gene, an MTHFR gene, which stands for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase enzyme. They don't break it down as well. They actually need to have the form of B12 that they can break down. And this is one that's going to become very, very apparent over time, that as we start getting more and more genetic testing, we're going to find out different forms of B vitamins or different forms of any vitamins that would be ideal for someone based on their ability to break down that particular supplement or that particular nutrient. So a lot of people who have B12 deficiencies, they're not actually B12 deficient, they're just not really good at breaking it down and utilizing it. So giving them a better one to use will work better for them. And that requires lab testing to do that shit. But like I've worked with this one, because B12 is very important with folate metabolism. I've done a ton of work in the pregnancy space, helping people fall pregnant and stuff like that. And the amount of doctors and people who aren't aware of this enzyme and how it affects folate metabolism is kind of wild. And getting people on this stuff has led to a significant amount of actual people getting really, really good results, which is really, really cool. Now, next one is collagen. So we got like type 1 versus type 2. So type 1 skin health, type 2 is joint support. Everyone thinks collagen is collagen. There's different types of collagen. So again, this is all like, let's investigate shit a little bit deeper, figure out the problem and figure out what is going on. It's a much better way to do it. Okay. And when you do that, it may take you a little bit more time, but you get way, way better outcomes. Now, mechanisms of strength development, we're doing okay now. We're back on track. With the mechanisms of strength development, we've got a couple of different ways that we develop it. We have neurological adaptation, okay, increased motor unit recruitment, increased neural drive. We have hypertrophy for increased muscle fiber size and satellite cell activation. Satellite cell activation is the reason why we can gain our muscle fibers back after a period of detraining. They kind of have muscle memory. We have tendon and connective tissue adaptation. So greater stiffness, improved force transmission. So what we can do is with our clients, what are they actually looking at doing? And how do we actually give them that? So for example, if someone wanted to lift as heavy as possible, we would certainly focus on a combination of max strength, hypertrophy, and power. If someone wanted to bulletproof their joints against injury, for an athlete, we'd focus on power, eccentric, and tendon connective tissue adaptation with a little bit of hypertrophy sprinkled in. So you want to look at what the client needs the most to actually give them that, and then what different form of training actually does that. So, for example, urological adaptation, jumping trap bar deadlift, really good for that. Muscle hypertrophy, trap bar deadlift, heavy weight, 4 to 12 repetitions. Fantastic for that. Tendon connective tissue adaptation. Cool. You could do a trap bar deadlift into a what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to answer this in 1 second, Angus. It's a great question. A trap bar deadlift into like the rack, for example, and creating that isometric from there, or overlift it. And then eccentric training, you could actually lift it up and then lower over a longer period of time for eccentric training. So each exercise can be twisted around these particular variables to get the outcome that you want. And that's all okay. Understanding what the variable is and then how you can basically adjust the program for that will be very, very useful for you to know. Now, the question I got was, where does proximity of failure fit into the equation for hypertrophy? It is probably the key component of hypertrophy, in my opinion. So, reason for that. Any exercise that we can load can be pretty hypertrophic. It can lead to definite hypertrophy. But you can also sandbag any exercise. By sandbag, I mean you can do it pretty soft, right? And you find the people who, this is where we look at experience and bodybuilding over what people, what research actually says, right? The biggest, strongest people are the ones who always train to failure. It's always the case. And there's this whole idea that, fatigue is going to ruin your life. And it really doesn't. Like, no one, I've never seen anyone actually get properly, truly fatigued in the gym besides needing 1 or 2 days off. Okay. And I've trained, like, I've done twice a days for like weeks at a time by myself. I've seen athletes do way more than that. Now, if you want a hypertrophy vote, taking yourself in the closest proximity to hypertrophy will maximize the recruitment of the fast twitch muscle fibers. So here's why. You lift a heavy enough weight, you're going to get the size principle is going to be activated. So you're going to hit the most amount of ammonia units relative to the time to the load that you can. Okay, the most amount of fast twitch. What happens as you fatigue and some fast twitch ammonia units start to fatigue, some of the low twitch fibers actually start to kick in, and they work to their maximum potential, which is why the last couple of reps of a set are always slower than the fast twitch reps of the set. We are getting hypertrophy, equal hypertrophy across all fiber types at that point. So if you do take your training to failure or close to failure, like 1 rep from failure is totally fine. The difference between 1 rep and failure is negligible in most situations. So my practical recommendation is when you can take isolated exercises where there's no real injury risk from failing, take them to failure, you've got nothing to lose. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. So if I'm doing bicep curls, for example, and I take my bicep curl to failure, I don't think anyone is going to argue that that's going to cause too much fatigue that I'm not going to be able to train again the next day. If someone gets too fatigued from doing an isolated bicep curl or a calf raise that they're so fucked the next day they can't train, I would question their systemic conditioning. Like, how fit are you or how unfit are you is my argument, right? So if you're resting heart rates over 90, you're a wimp, basically, when it comes to weight training. Now, if we look at our compound exercises like squats, benches, deadlifts, there can be a set, or maybe benches and squats more so than deadlifts, because deadlifts you just let go of the bar. There can be a safety issue going to failure. Okay, there can absolutely be a safety issue going to failure if you're not set up correctly. So, and the actual difference between 1 rep away from failure and then failure itself, not really statistically significant from a hypertrophy point of view. Most people, when they think they're at failure, are probably not at failure. Okay, they've probably got a few more reps in the tank. So I would actually even argue that psychological failure develops far more for physical failure in most people. Easiest way to do that is to kind of test that yourself, is to piss yourself off over something that you're angry about, listen to some music that gets you psyched up, and then do a max lift and see how you go. Most people will always lift more when they're a little bit angry or a bit G'd up, or if a coach is yelling at them. Okay, so most people, psychological failure happens well before physical failure. It even happened to me 2 weeks ago. I was at the gym and I was at the powerlifting gym and I went and deadlift 240 and I was just like, no, I haven't got it today. I kind of lifted it halfway and then dropped it down. And the coach who deadlifts 310, he looked at me and just said, "You're being soft, fucking lift it." And then everyone in the gym looked at me. So guess what I did? I had no choice. I had to lift it, right? The failure was psychological, not physical. I was fucked after it. It was a heavy lift, but that's kind of like the point there, that a lot of people, it's here rather than in their muscles. So my recommendation for most people, go as close to failure as you possibly can, as often as you can. And as long as you're applying progressive overload, you'll do okay. And when people worry about, oh, how do I know when I'm at failure? Take them to failure. It's the easiest thing. Actually make them do a set to true failure. And when they do that, they go, all right, cool. That's how hard I'm meant to be training. And a lot of people don't do that. Really simple exercise to do it on is leg press. Have I told you the leg press story, Angus, my client? All right. So this guy had legs that were pretty good. Actually, they were really good legs. Like, he had like proper muscly legs compared to everywhere else in his body. The rest of his body really wasn't it from a training perspective, but that wasn't his goal. His goal was weight loss, but his legs were jacked as shit. And he was doing a leg press. And he did like 10 reps at like 100 kilos. And I walked over to him in the gym and I said, like, what was that? And he's like, oh, it's so tiring. And I was like, nah, that ain't it, man. And he's like, that was maximum, I swear. I was like, you're absolutely full of shit in every way possible. And I said, next set, I'm going to watch you. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to yell at you, and I'm going to tell you when to stop. And he got up to 40 reps and I walked away bored. He was nowhere near failure, but having someone yell at him, having someone hold him accountable and stuff like that, it actually showed how much more capable he was of lifting. Next workout, he's up to 200 and something kilos of leg press. So most people have no idea. I had to take him to failure to get there. And sure enough, then he actually understood how he had to train. Most people are scared of hard training. They really are. And, it's fine because it sucks. It can be really painful, but most people are really scared of it. And taking people to proximity to failure, every single person I've come across who doesn't get good results from training generally does two things, apart from let's ruling out physiological conditions, which we're doing today. They don't push themselves hard and they don't track what they eat, or they think they're eating really well when their idea of eating well is not in reality. So push people harder is my general rule of thumb as a PT. Now, with how endurance and metabolic conditioning work, we need to decide with our clients which one of these systems they actually need. What we got next? Cool. So they need to improve their aerobic metabolism. Do they need to improve their anaerobic glycolysis? Do they need to do high intensity interval training versus zone 2 training? Okay. So is mechanical tension more important than proximity to failure? Combine the two. Okay. Combine the two, and then you get a pretty good answer, because the proximity to failure discussion basically changes when you're doing really high reps. It's a good question, I guess. So if you're doing like 20 to 40 reps all the time, time of the workout, that becomes an issue. And the fact that you're wasting so many reps, which do have an energetic cost, before you get to fail. Okay, so if you're doing a set of, you're meant to fail at 30 reps, you've done about 22 to 24 reps that don't really move the needle too much in hypertrophy because you're not creating a whole bunch of mechanical tension. So again, there's a reason why all the biggest people in the world train in this 4 to 8 to 12 rep range, because it is the most practical to allow you to achieve those goals. Practicality always has to come to it. And overall volume, generally, volume is overrated as a proxy for hypertrophy, in my opinion. Okay. I don't think you need to do 60 sets of quads per week. And to get big quads, you can, but you might die. I find that if you take your sets to mechanical failure or close enough to it with a high degree of mechanical tension, you don't need a ton of sets to actually get results, a ton of volume. So let's say Mark knows this from personal experience. If I put you on the pendulum squat or the hack squat and you let me train you, you need 2 to 3 sets and your workout was probably done for the day. And that's not me trying to be like cocky or anything about that. It's just that those two exercises have a high degree of mechanical tension, and we can push you very, very close to failure in terms of proximity, and also probably push you, with some assisted lifts and stuff like that to actual true failure. And most people, when they do a set or two like that, they're like, cool, I'm done for the day. I'm fucked. And that's totally fine. Mark did the set where we actually took him to a drop set where we reduced the weight off, where I thought the guy would walk for a couple of days. It was very impressive. But he kept on going, and he got good quad hypertrophy benefits out of that. So volume overall, I think for most people, the volume recommendations are that anywhere between the 10 sets a week for most body parts seems to be pretty much a good proxy for most people to go to, and you don't need to push super high volume. But again, that's under the guise or the idea that we're only chasing hypertrophy. Sorry. I will include more volume if I'm working with an athletic population client, because again, or someone who's other goals outside of just being jacked. So it's never just black and white unless you're working with a black and white lifter. So example, like a bodybuilder, you just give them hypertrophy work. That's fine. Great. They can get by with 2 to 3 sets per workout, 2 to 3 sets of, even one set of some exercises can be enough for a bodybuilder who's really good at training to failure to get good results, to get the best results. But if you've got someone who wants to improve their overall capacity for doing things, I would give them more sets, because it works on that stuff too. And they wouldn't have a higher level work capacity, which is going to have its own benefits. Are there other ways to develop it? Absolutely. There's different circumstances for all these things, which we can break down in another call. Like if someone's highly anaerobic glycolytic and they need to do a lot of that in sport, doing a ton of sets and stuff like that can actually be a really good tool for them. It will give them some hypertrophy, but they won't get probably as much as the other guy because the amount of recovery they have to do is higher. And that's the kind of Downside, you may not get as much jackedness, but you get a ton more capacity. And that could be the goal. So a good sport to show that example is CrossFit. CrossFit guys and girls have incredible capacity. Incredible capacity. And they're jacked, but they're not the most jacked. And it doesn't matter that they're not the most jacked because their training is capacity based for their goal. So they all have a place where they can actually fit. They're really good questions, Angus. I'm impressed. Now, the next one was high intensity versus zone. Work out which one you want. We'll move through it now. So we're looking at chronic adaptations, which is the most important thing that we're kind of looking at today, right? Out of all these from training, then these are the ones that we're kind of looking at doing. So hypertrophy, we want volume-based resistance training with mechanical tension. So doing as much mechanical tension into it as possible. Okay, that's where we want. Cardiovascular health, zone 2 endurance is probably going to be the most important one, okay, for mitochondrial efficiency. Lactate clearance, high intensity interval training, or any kind of anaerobic threshold improvement program will be ideal. Hormonal optimization, strength training with proper recovery seems to work really well with some cardiovascular health stuff. And then tendon strength, heavy isos, and plyometrics for connective tissue adaptation. Now, the argument that people have against periodization is, can you do this at the same time? Yes, you can. You can do all these at the same time. You just can't do the amount of volume that you can to get the best possible adaptation. That doesn't make it a periodization a bad thing. That's the argument that I will have. It's like, just because someone may want to be more specific on one thing, it's totally fine to do that. You don't have to chase every single chicken at one time. You can trace one chicken at a time, keep the others on maintenance, which is quite low volume, and then improve something a little faster, and then come back to the other stuff. Now, the last couple of things, which we'll quickly go through, and then we'll go through conclusion. The last one we'll go through is recovery and adaptation, okay? So with recovery and adaptation and fatigue, if we understand the supercompensation model, training equals speed, fatigue equals recovery, which equals adaptation, okay? There's a couple of things that we need to be aware of. The recovery process in muscle cannot be accelerated by more sleep. It cannot be accelerated very much by more food. It's very similar to the hormonal effect of saturated fats. This is where a lot of people get shit wrong in training. So people will think that doing, if they're training for hypertrophy and stuff like that, oh, cool, I can improve my recovery by having an ice bath, for example. That ice bath will actively decrease hypertrophy because it reduces inflammation, which is needed to bring the stuff in for it to heal. The ice bath is basically designed to make you less sore so you can do the sport again. Because in sport, the whole application of doing the sport again and again and again is the ideal way to get better. So that's where that's really, really useful. In hypertrophy training or strength training, it's not so much useful because it's more of a physiological based response rather than a skill set based response. Okay, so for a sport that's someone who's skill based in their activities, being able to do it more, what is better? The more skill practice you have, generally the better. It's like someone learns a language and then they never speak it again. They might remember a couple of words, but they're not going to be able to have a fluent conversation because they haven't practiced that skill. Whereas with its hypertrophy, for example, you don't need to practice the skill of hypertrophy anywhere near as much to actually have that. Yeah, well, it's me in French at the moment. I missed the day and I forgot 5 words. No, I didn't forget 5 words, but it's the same type of thing. If you don't practice the language, or guitar playing, for example. With guitar playing, just use that as an example, there is a supercompensation model for a couple of key tissues. Your fingers are one of them. So the calluses that you get in your fingers, yeah, and the position to hold your wrist. And then like there's a little bit of physiology when you're picking type work, but that's fine. Like Metallica have a thing where they can play one song, they know they're good to tour because it's so hard to actually play that song in terms of the actual endurance of their hand. But once they get past that model of supercompensation where your hands are callous enough to play the guitar, it's entirely a skill-based thing. So the more hours of high quality skill practice you get better. You don't need to actually make your fingers stronger by doing that. Okay, same with the piano, same with like any skill-based outcome. So this model here, we need to look at our clients and what they're doing. Are they looking at training a skill-based outcome? Are they looking at training like a hypertrophy-based outcome? Is it a strength-based outcome? And then what are the limiting factors? So if we have a look at something like Olympic weightlifting versus powerlifting, the thing with Olympic weightlifting versus powerlifting is the disappearance of the concentric phase, the eccentric phase, pardon me, in Olympic lifting. because the eccentric phase is where we cause the most amount of fatigue. Okay, so powerlifters cannot lift as frequently as Olympic weightlifters in the main lifts because of the fatigue that the eccentric phase builds up. A lot of Olympic lifters will train 2 times a day. They'll train 12 times a week, some Olympic lifters. So it's because their lack of eccentric phase makes it easier for them to do the stuff that they need to do, which is cool. Great. It's the benefit of what they do. So we can look at, we'd say, an Olympic weightlifter, for example. It's a little bit skill-based, a little bit hypertrophy-based. They will get there just from sheer volume over time. It will give some kind of adaptations. They can probably benefit more from cold therapy, for example, to be able to train in between sessions than, say, a powerlifter. And definitely more so than a bodybuilder. If I was a bodybuilder, I would avoid that like the plague. Okay? So with looking at the clients that you have, right, roller recovery, I would look at all these things as an order and go, all right, cool, what do I need to actually change for that client, or how can I influence them to get a better outcome? So for example, if someone's immune system is fucked, cool, back to here, they're getting overly high levels of inflammation, they're getting sick all the time, that's going to affect their recovery from training more so than anything else. Fix that, they feel better. Clients who are chronically immune stressed will never get as good gains. Okay, so definitely need to be aware of that. If they're not getting good enough sleep, cool, we're going to see problems with growth hormone release, memory consolidation, etc. Look at sleep optimization for that particular person. By the way, sleep optimization is really freaking hard to do because of phones, and also people don't like changing their nighttime activities. Now, this is where the supplements, is where like people say supplements don't work, blah, 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 lifestyle is more important. Man, you take like 9 milligrams of melatonin, you'll be asleep pretty quickly, right? It'll put you off your phone. So a lot of the time, something that's a passive intervention can be very useful for your clients because it can create a behavioral change really quickly. And that passive intervention gives them an actual output that they can experience. And when they experience that output, they then trust the rest of the stuff that you do. It's really cool. Now here as well, active recovery strategies, for example, saunas. For an endurance athlete, they might be really good for building up endurance adaptations. But the key point is you need to understand what each of these recovery strategies is actually doing for the client, because is it going to be, in some situations, it could be detrimental, in some situations, it can be positive. So for example, we know that sauna, like everyone thinks saunas they're good for relaxation and all that type of stuff. According to the Finnish studies, they have a 40 to 70% decrease in all-cause mortality. You've done 3 or 4 times a week, which is a pretty statistically massively significant number to look at. The thing with it is, for a lot of people, is if someone has high blood pressure, the sauna situation can be really, really bad. Okay, it can actually cause problems and actually make them sick. So it's more important. So I think it's a pretty decent idea to actually go through all these things in detail and then look from there. Cool. So what do we do with this? We got to start, there's a lot of understanding that we need to get, a lot of knowledge that we can actually find. From there, we select the right intervention based on the goals. We understand our individual difference adaptation, and we combine our interventions for maximal efficiency. So if one thing can knock off 3 things, it's going to be a good thing for us to work with. So yeah, that's basically the presentation. If we can understand these systems and start to break these down, I would recommend that people make a flowchart of this and try and see what their understanding is, and then actually investigate what people say and see how it works. Go into PubMed or something like that to read the papers. You'll find a ton of stuff that is really, really useful for your clients. All right, guys, namaste. Hope you enjoyed, and I will speak to you soon.